Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we help you make marriage real, fun, and simple. Each week, we have honest conversations about one simple thing that can make your marriage better. Because when your marriage is better, everything's better. I'm CJ, and this week, I'm thrilled to be joined by our resident newlywed, Afton.
Hi.
Our 22-year marriage veteran. He's an author, speaker, and the director of marriedpeople.org, Ted Lowe.
Hey, everybody.
And our very special guest this week, Sandra Stanley.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we are going to find out a little bit more about Sandra in a second, but this week on the Married People Podcast, we're asking the question, how do we create breathing room in our lives and in our marriages? So, Ted, can you give us just a little bit of a sense of where we're heading this week and introduce our very special guest? Because I know that you guys have known each other for a while.
We have. And Sandra, when people say, how did you get to work at North Point, which I did for 9 years before we started Married People, I say Sandra Stanley. And I don't know if you remember
I love
this.
taking credit for things. It's awesome.
You can have full credit because years ago, we were with you guys at Big Stuff Camp. Andy was speaking, Nancy and I were doing drama, and we were tired of traveling. We had a 2-year-old. We had him in 18 states before he was 2, and we were done. So we're like, what's this next phase for us? And I was like, I think I want to go back in the local church. And so we actually went out to dinner with you guys.
I remember.
And talked about what it could be. And I felt like God, this next phase, I wanted it to be, the local church, but also marriage, which was kind of funny because I remember Andy saying, that's a good thing to want to do.
It
was great.
There may not be a paycheck attached to it.
Yeah. Or if we do, you can get paid for something else. But I remember the next day we saw you guys in the hall and you said, I told him he needs to hire you or someone else would. And they did. And then they didn't know what to do with me for several months. So thank you for that, Sandra.
You're welcome. You're welcome. There are times that I meet someone and I look at Andy and I go, okay, don't let this one get away. And y'all were a package awesome deal that we did not want to let get away. So
you're sweet. It was you actually started this podcast, Sandra. So because it all started way back then. So
welcome to my podcast.
Right.
Yeah. I really like picturing Andy saying to you, Ted, for you, maybe marriage should be more of a hobby. I like to picture that happening.
I remember Lanny Donahoe saying, hey, when you go into the meeting, don't go in there just wanting to do marriage. Just say, hey, this is, what we want to do. We'll work at the local church. And so that was good advice. So because I was able to pivot off that pretty quickly.
Yeah,
so
that's amazing.
Great.
Yeah. So, but great experience for us there and kind of launch what I feel like we're doing now, helping churches and helping couples to, we say on this podcast, we want to make marriage real, fun, and simple.
Yeah.
And I've watched you and Andy over the years really do marriage well. In fact, I had someone say to me after I'd spoken somewhere, they knew from North Point, and it was kind of a sad question, but I understood what they were saying. He said, tell me that Andy Stanley's the real deal. And it made me sad that he thought that was more of the exception than the rule. But I said, oh, man, he's the real deal for sure. And I think that's because the first thing that pops into my mind is how you guys, we're doing marriage and family starting North Point. And I think he said, God, I'm going to give you, 45 hours a week and whatever you can do with it. But I know you guys have so lived this out. So that's
thank you.
We're thrilled that you're here. So
he has led very well in that, and I'm so grateful. I'm the beneficiary.
Well, I think you've had to lead him a couple times too, so that works out well. So Sandra, we are very thrilled that you are here today. Tell people that are listening a little bit about your story.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm a native Georgian, so grew up in Middle Georgia, moved to Atlanta to go to college, and met Andy my junior year in college, and we started dating, and he waited for me to graduate. And so this summer, we will have been married 30 years.
Wow.
Which
awesome.
Just is a crazy number in my head to even
feel
think about.
Like
No,
it's been 30 years?
No, it has flown by. So we've got 3 kids. Andrew is 25. He'll be 26 in a couple months. Garrett's 24, Allie's 22, and we have a sweet daughter-in-law. Garrett, our middle one, got married this past November. So daughter-in-law Danielle, which is a whole new fun thing. It's awesome. We have foster kids in and out, and just got our 18-year-old transitioned to an independent living program. So we are empty nesters officially.
Wow.
We were empty nesters for a minute after Allie left for college before our foster daughter moved in full-time with us. And so now we're back to empty nesterhood, and it's awesome.
I've heard that it's awesome.
Yeah.
Give those of us who have 3 teenagers in the house, like myself, and after with her teenager, give us hope. What is the empty nester thing?
Empty nesterhood is so great. However, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think it does kind of hang its hat on how well you do marriage leading up to the empty nester years. But Andy and I still really, really like each other. And I hear if I get home before him, I still love hearing that garage door go up.
That's
and
awesome.
so it's great. It's great. We're having fun. It's, a little more flexible. And I told him this morning, we were laughing about something. I said, it would be really hard, really easy to get selfish in this season because you do have a little more flexibility and ability to kind of just do what you want.
Sure.
And it would be really easy to decide, we've done enough. Let's just coast and enjoy life now. So,
Well, speaking of, being an empty nester now and making the shift from parenting to, wow, you have all this time now, or you have breathing room, supposedly, right?
Right.
But then you shift your focus and start writing books, the comparison trap, breathing room. So what led to that shift?
It's such an interesting thing. When Andrew, our oldest, was about 9th grade, I realized that like empty nesterhood is a reality, and you think it's just like a myth, when you're in the midst of parenting and you don't necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel. But when Andrew's in 9th grade, I realized we really have about 3.5 more years, and Andrew will graduate, and then the following year, Garrett will graduate, and then 2 years after that, Allie will graduate. And so I realized there's going to be a next season. And I began just asking God to give me some wisdom about what's next. I recognized that I had a fairly significant platform of influence.
Yeah.
And so I just began asking God for some direction and some wisdom about what would be next, and asking Him to prepare me, not knowing what it was. I had no desire really to be a speaker or a writer or any of that. And so I just didn't know what it would be. And God was so faithful with baby steps to just begin leading me to a place where I had a heart for children from who've come from hard places. And I did not see that coming. I never would have suspected that might be my path, because I wasn't the parent that wanted to perpetually parent. As much as I've enjoyed my kids, and this adult season is amazing. As much as I enjoyed it, I was looking forward to a new season and doing things differently. And so God was faithful in just some baby steps and leading in that direction. And then as the reality came, and I did, when your kids get to be about 16, it's almost like you're an empty nester anyway, because they've got, a way to get where they want to go typically. And they're so busy. They are so busy. And so, moved in the direction, we became foster parents, and that was incredible and continues to be. But God just opened doors for me to do some other things. I'm in seminary now, and just loving that. I'm at Dallas Seminary, about halfway through my master's, and
that's amazing.
So that's been fun, and then doing this writing, and it's just been great. But God was just so faithful in just giving baby steps here and there, and leading me and preparing me for what's next, which I think He delights in doing when we ask Him.
And your latest book, which really isn't just a book, it's Breathing Room, but it's a book, it's a video series, it's a devotional, it's an app, is really what we're diving into here today. So we're talking about how do we create breathing room in our marriage.
Yeah, and I was as you're talking, I'm like, you're the perfect person to write about this, because I'm sure y'all are like the busiest people on the planet, and I'm sure you've had seasons where when you were launching a brand new church, and that was probably really time consuming and probably impacted your marriage and your family. And so how do you do that? How did you guys create breathing room in your marriage in those seasons?
It's interesting because there's so many different seasons of, married without kids, married with little bitties, married with kids who are, have their weekends filled up with baseball and softball and crazy, all kinds of stuff. And then those teenage years are a whole different season too. And it really looked differently for us in each different season. When we launched North Point, point, our kids, I think I was actually pregnant with our third. So we had 2 toddlers and another one on the way.
So easy. Like, why not start a
just
church,
the best
too?
Time, the best time to do something like that. And with that was a job change. I mean, the whole thing was a job change.
Right.
And so there's added, pressure with just leaving one thing and launching into something else. But during those years, we really did recognize that, or Andy in his wisdom and foresight saw that this is a tricky season and it's a time-consuming season. And by about 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon, I was tired. Maybe earlier than that, if I'm honest. But so that is when he really did begin to just go before the Lord and say, God, I've got about 40 to 45 hours a week, and this is probably about a 120-hour-a-week job, and I'm just going to trust you. I'm going to be home. Andy asked me, in a conversation one day, he said, Sandra, in the perfect world, this isn't the perfect world, but in the perfect world, what time would be most helpful for me to get home? And, so I didn't say 2, which was, maybe what I would have loved. Yeah. But I did want him to have a job because that was, I felt like that was important.
Yeah.
And so we kind of landed at, if you were home around realistically 5-ish, 4 or 5, that would be amazing. Mm-hmm. And so he just decided, okay, I'm going to go to work every morning at about 6:30 or 7. Mm-hmm. And so he just backed it up. Mm-hmm. And when you've got little bitty ones, they go to bed early. So we could go to bed early too. So it was doable to start earlier. Mm-hmm. And we laughed so many times during that season because people would want to get together, and he needed to get together with people. And they'd say, hey, how about we meet about 5, 4:30 or 5. He's like, well, I can meet with you at 4:30 or 5 a.m., but can't meet with you at 4:30 or 5 p.m.
Wow.
So, it looks different in every season, and those were those early years.
And I realize up to this point, Sandra, we haven't really defined what breathing room is. So let's back up a little bit. We're talking about breathing room in different seasons, but what is breathing room? What are we really talking about here?
Breathing room is another way to say margin. And the way that we define it is it's the space between our current pace and our limit.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So when we recognize what our limit is and we back it up from there, that space in between is our breathing room.
Can you say that one more time?
It's breathing room is the space between our current pace and our limit. And it's another way of saying margin, but they're just, multiple areas in our life where we really need to have breathing room. And in the study that we do, it's a 4-week women's study with a free app. And what we do is, and the app has videos, but we talk about having, developing and maintaining breathing room with our time, with our finances, and in our relationships. And those are kind of the 3 things we camp out on. The study is really for women, but breathing room is certainly, it's an all skate. So, it's something that we all need. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's what I was telling these guys. I watched all the videos, and I think I told you in an email, wait a minute, this is a men's and women's video. Yeah.
Well, and it started off that way. It was actually a series that Andy did some years ago, and it made, of all the series he's done, and there's so many amazing ones, it probably made the biggest and most lasting impact on me as it related to marriage, parenting, and even just my own personal, to-do list and stuff, which affects everybody else, as we all know. But so it started off with a series that he did, and it was so impactful that I, in the back of my mind, thought, you know what, it would be so fun to take this and craft it into something that's specific for women.
Sure.
And it's been so fun to see college girls in their sororities doing the study together, and just all the way through grandmas. So my mom has led one, or is actually getting ready to lead a group in Dublin, and so it's been fun to see the spectrum of it is an issue for everybody, regardless of season.
Yeah, and you get so practical in this too. That was one of the things I love the most about it. And one of the things you talk about is we have this tendency to not want to disappoint people.
Yeah.
And I actually got to put that into action. I had spoke at this church, and they said, well, you want to do lunch afterwards. And it's not that I didn't want to have lunch with them, but I had been gone for two or 3 days already, and I was like, I need to be with my kids.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, I would so love to do that. Maybe we could do it during the week, but I've been gone, and I really want to be with the family. And they were like, great.
Yeah.
But it's that part of me that doesn't want to disappoint, or then you feel guilty and you want to feel like we don't care about people. So do you think that that's one of the tensions that people feel?
Yeah. One of the things that we talk about in the study is that our tendency to not create or really not maintain breathing room boils down at its core really to a set of fears. The fear of missing out is sometimes kind of at the root of it. The fear of falling behind. The fear of not mattering. I mean, there's so many things, and we're so aware of what everybody else is doing. We are living in an age of awareness.
All right, so far I have 3 of the 4.
Yeah, okay. And then the big one for me, which sounds like it maybe Ted's, is the fear of disappointing people.
Yeah.
That's the 4th one. And I love to say yes. I love to say yes to people because, people take a risk asking us to do things. And there's nothing I love more than to be able to say yes and agree to do something for somebody or help them or speak or whatever it is. And so that one is hard for me. And that's the one I have to kind of chronically deal with.
So Ted, you're talking about, you're speaking at a church and, you didn't want to disappoint them. And so you decided to say no and get home quicker. So has there been, as an author, speaker, communicator, a director of marriedpeople.org, you're very busy. So is there a season of your life that you could look back on and say, that's a season I was really, lacking breathing room, before we start talking about creating breathing room? So what does that look like for you?
Nita and I were blessed from the very beginning to have people in our lives that spoke this into us. From Rick and Kay Warren to Doug and Kathy Fields, and then with Andy and Sandra, it's always been modeled for us. So we've always said we've never had an excuse not to do family well, because we've been exposed to so many great things. And even when we started Married People in 2010, I took that exact number that Andy, had given, said, I'm going to give 45 hours. I'm going to give 45 hours to start North Point. And so our kids were littles at the time, and we said the same thing. Okay, God, we're going to give you, 45 hours, whatever you can do with this. And I, fast forward, 8 years later, and I've got a high schooler, 2 high schoolers and one about to graduate. We don't do a lot of things perfectly, for sure, but I felt that this was something that was so tangible and applicable, and even had that number of 45, and that we said, okay, here's what it is. And I feel like I didn't give my family up for that we can look back on memories in a sweet way. Not that we're always perfect, but I think we've also learned that there's seasons that are busy, and that's okay. It's called Orange Conference coming up. It's called different things.
Right.
But and our kids, it's okay to say to our kids, hey, we're going to be gone a lot.
Yeah.
This is going to be, but when this is over, we're going to do vacation, or life will come back to normal.
You manage the tension.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
What about you, Afton? So has there been a season that you could look back on and say, I had no breathing room there? I'm just trying to, what does that look like for you?
I mean, when you asked Ted that question, I was like, I hope CJ doesn't ask me, because I feel like I'm in a constant state of not having breathing room, because I think there are certain personality types, and I'm just one of them, that I fill up my time if there is time to fill.
Right.
Or
there's always something to do.
If there's a little bit of margin, I'm like, oh, I can say yes to these things now. We've got a to-do list that's so long, and I'm like, I've got on my Evernote, like, to do at home, to do at work, and I just tick away at those until there's nothing left, but there's never nothing left.
I feel that way too. Like, every season of life is my new busiest season,
right?
Especially when you're more or less our age, where we're still kind of getting planting our feet in our careers and that kind of a thing, where it's just like every season is,
and you want to say yes because you want to be known as somebody because
you want to progress,
that adds value, or whatever it is. So I think for us, it's really hard.
Which really goes back to those fears.
Yeah.
It goes back to those fears of wanting to be known for something, that fear of mattering.
Yeah. So how do you do that? So how, is the answer just kind of, did you guys start saying no to things when you wanted to say yes? Or how do you practically create that margin and let it be there?
For Andy and me, it was a constant conversation of evaluating what are the things and who are the people in this season that are most important, and then taking the next step to look at the calendar and go, okay, are those things and those people actually on the calendar? Because what hits our calendar is what we do, or what hits our Evernote list is what we do. So are those things that are most important, and are those people who are most important actually what's on the calendar and actually what we're doing, or are they getting the leftovers?
So that's so great because it really does ebb and flow.
It does.
The margin, it's
It
not like
really
all right,
does.
we're going to sit down and do this, once for the next, 2 years and we're done here. It is like it's a game of constant adjustments.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, Sandra.
Okay.
So
You kind of gave me a look, like like I'm going to
I don't know.
spring a big
I don't
one
know.
on
Maybe
ya.
this is just we'll see what this. So when Andy starts to run out of breathing room, or when you start to run out of breathing room, what impact does that have on your marriage?
Oh my goodness, a big impact. It just, when we are too busy, we just lose the connection. And I think that's just a natural thing that happens in any relationship. I think of my single friends or different people in different seasons, maybe who have aging parents or college girls who are just running and gunning and, don't get to go home for 6 or 8 weeks, and their moms, this is sounding kind of personal, and their moms are going, "Hey, are you coming home like ever?"
You remember all that I did for you?
So, yeah. But as it relates to marriage in particular, as the calendar fills up with stuff, the opportunities for connection, for intimacy, for time alone together, all of those things start to go. And those are easy things to let go because they don't necessarily feel urgent.
Yeah.
And it is so easy, I think, sometimes for us to let the urgent trump the important. And that goes
great.
back to that constant conversation. Hey, how are we doing? Maybe even coming up with a little set of questions that are just for the two of you to chat about and make sure different areas are healthy or just whatever, but a constant conversation.
And I have a follow-up question, Sandra. So this is actually from my wife, who's like, hey, okay, I was running through a few of these questions, like, I think it'd be fun to ask her about that. And she was like, well, if you're going to ask that, you need to ask this follow-up. So this is the follow-up to the question I just asked you.
Hence the look you gave.
Right. So my wife, Terry, asked, so if you notice your spouse is running out of breathing room, because it is a moving target, how do you approach that conversation with them? How do you bring that up?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I see you're about to run yourself into the ground.
Right.
So what is that how do you approach
I
that
wonder
with
why
your
Terry
spouse?
was asking you to ask.
I have no idea.
Probably
Afton.
just popped in her mind out of nowhere. Is what I'm thinking.
CJ is a little bit of an overachiever. CJ is, how many podcasts are you host for, CJ?
Let's not even, we don't need to go down that road.
He's a hard worker, CJ. Yeah.
What does that conversation look like with your spouse?
That's such a great question. And that kind of introduces something that y'all probably have talked about in previous conversations. But, approach is everything. And for different personalities, there are different approaches that are effective. And I think part of having a great marriage is being a student of your spouse and understanding, what is the approach to, have this conversation, or what is the environment to have this conversation, or what is the best timing to have this conversation. So any hard conversation, we have to, I think, take a pause rather than just all of a sudden launching into, are you really going to say yes to that? I mean, instead of launching into that kind of passive aggressive thing that I sometimes can easily launch into, if I will just pause and say to myself, okay, Sandra, what's the best approach to have this conversation? And again, I know I keep saying this, but constant conversations means open permission. So if the two of you are in a constant conversation about the calendar, about how you spend your time, about how you spend your money, about how you do relationships, then you're not having to jockey for an approach as much because it's a constant conversation and there's not a defensive thing. This is something that we do. This is something we talk about. So that would be my off-the-cuff answer, I guess.
That's great.
Something like that.
Constant conversation.
I love that.
Yeah, and with parenting, our kids, as you know, Ted, because you've got 3, they can come from the same gene pool and still be so different from each other.
100%.
And Andy and I figured out early on that each of our kids had a different we had a different approach for each of our kids when we needed to have a hard conversation. For Andrew, he's a just the facts kid, always was. few words as possible. Just tell me what you need me to know, and I'm going to move on. And so Garrett, it was a whole different thing for Garrett. I would sit on the edge of his bed and scratch his back and talk about his basketball game for a little while, and then slowly ease into, and he's relaxed and he's ready to talk. Yeah. For Allie, it was a whole different. Andy was the best one to talk to Allie about stuff because they're both so musical and creative, and I'm far more analytical. And so he would go in there and pick up her guitar, and they'd sing some Taylor Swift songs, and then he'd put the guitar down, and they would have their conversation, and it would just go well. So not always. No conversations always go well. I won't pretend that parenting is just all about figuring out your kid's approach. But to answer your wife's question, I think sometimes if it's not a constant conversation, ask yourself, what's the best approach? Just take a pause, take a deep breath, and
that's great.
And without that breathing room, you're not going to have conversations. You're not going to have times to play songs with the kids. You don't have those. I never see you to have a conversation. I mean, that's a huge part of this whole thing of giving yourself a margin to have relationships.
And evaluating the calendar. How many speaking engagements do we feel like we can handle in a 2-week period? And really, as we've looked at our calendar, we've learned to not just look at a date to say a yes or no. I look at the week before it, and I look at the week after it, because I want context for what does this whole month look like, and is adding one more thing going to push me past that place where we have the breathing room that we need, and so there's context, I think, in that.
So can I ask, when you have that margin, when you have that breathing room, and I'm going to be the one that's transparent on this podcast.
Whoa.
I'm just telling you, when I have breathing room, or when I have any time to myself, I usually spend it watching Netflix. Yeah. Or I spend that margin doing something that I want to do that is in no way helpful or recharges me, but I think it does. I'm just trying to use my margin to coast, Yeah. And I feel like when you have that breathing room, how can you use that margin to set you up better for kind of launching you into the
how
things
do
you
get
have to
the
do?
rest that you need?
Yeah.
I think that really goes back to your own personality and what it is that makes, that really does rejuvenate you and kind of press your reset button, so to speak. For me, I just need some time in the quiet. Andy and I are both introverts, which is kind of an odd thing that people I don't think necessarily expect, but we both recharge in the quiet. And so for me, it's that. Garrett, the only extrovert of the 5 of the Stanleys, he recharges a whole different way. He wants to go to the gym and rally a whole posse of other guys and play basketball. I mean, that recharges him. Yeah. Don't make him sit in a quiet room by himself, and heaven forbid read a book.
Here, read one of your dad's books.
Yeah. So, but he's just different, and we're all wired differently. I think it's one of those things to really figure out what that looks like. And one of the things I think is just so incredibly important is for a time alone with the Lord to be part of our regular rhythm of our day, whether it's morning or evening or whatever. I just think no matter what your personality, no matter what your skill set and giftedness and all of that, it just trumps everything, because in those moments, the Lord alone with our Heavenly Father, I think He just presses the reset button for us. And I always encourage people, if that's not part of your regular rhythm, it will do more for finding, establishing, maintaining breathing room than anything else.
Because I think the same exact thing. If you sit in what matters, and He says, you matter to me, instead of trying to matter in other ways, going, I matter because He loves me.
It's the best way to deal with that set of fears.
Right.
Wow. Absolutely.
He does. Wow. He dresses them in a way that only He can.
Exactly.
Sandra, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't ask Nancy's question. Yeah. So I'm going to do that. And I think we have one for Hudson, right?
I love that our spouses asked us to ask.
We should have invited them. It would have been a party around the table.
No. They'll say too much.
Right. They know too much.
They know too much.
No, we've talked about that before. It'd probably be a way better podcast if they showed up. So Nancy's question was, how do we deal with the guilt of saying no or not doing what all the other moms are doing for their kids?
Wow.
That's a great question. Wow. That's a great question. Let me start with an illustration. When our boys were both playing baseball, there was one particular season. Every other season, they would be on the same team because they were close enough in age, and their birthdays would fall every other year where we could put them on the same team, which was awesome. Because as much as we really did love being out the baseball field, it was kind of nice not to have double the number of practices and double the number of games. But we were sitting, Andy was coaching one particular season, and so we were having a little parent meeting after the game, and he said, hey, I'm not going to be here next week. Sandra and I are going on a little trip, and so if there's somebody that could step in and, be the third base coach, that'd be awesome, whatever. And we talk about this all the time. We could not believe how many of the parents said, wait, y'all are like by yourselves? You're going on a trip by yourselves? Are your boys going to be here? We're like, yeah, they'll be at the game. Well, we haven't been on a trip by ourselves since our kids were born.
Wow.
And so it was kind of this, they were just shocked that this was happening. But the great thing, and to kind of get to Nancy's question, I think a lot of times when we take these steps, when we have breathing room, when we maybe sort of publicly say no to something that everybody else is saying yes to, it almost gives other people permission to do the same thing. And I know there have been times where I have gotten an invitation to be somewhere, speak somewhere, do something, and I have said, you know what, oh my goodness, I would love to do that. That's one of my favorite things to talk about, or that's one of my favorite things to do. I would love to do it. But Andy and I have just decided that in this season, we really want to have at least 4 nights at home around the dinner table with our kids, and that week is already, there's already as much on the calendar as we can put on the calendar for that week. And there's just, I've had people come back around later to say, you know what, Sandra, you probably don't remember saying this, but one time we invited you, and then they tell us it gave us permission, or it just made us realize, wow, we can say no to stuff.
And it's okay.
And it is okay.
It is
so
okay.
To Nancy's question, I would say, you know what? You take that to the Lord on your knees, and then you say no to what you need to say no to, and trust that He's going to take that and even use it beyond what you think.
So good. And that is, when we have said that to couples, we're going away just the two of them.
Yeah. You've gotten the same response.
They just,
it's a
just
category
don't
buster.
But it is. And we would come back, we would always say, but we come back such better parents.
Yeah.
The kids were been grandparents, so they were typically worse kids
when
we got back.
But you had the margin to deal with it.
But now I've had all this breathing room on vacation, but it was literally, we've got to have those days just the two of us to go away to get some breathing room there. It's better for everyone that lives at our house. And so, but you're exactly right. People see that as completely
alien.
Foreign. Yeah. Exactly. So, important.
That's great.
Well, let me ask Hudson's question, which this is really true for us, because I think we're in a time right now where, especially our generation, I feel like we usually have jobs and then we have side jobs. Like we're just always working. There's always something to be doing. And I think there's things we have to do and there's things that we want to do. And so what are some, Hudson's question is basically, what are some practical ways that we can put some strategies into place so that we have in our time, here's things that we have to do, here's things I want to do, how do I fit them all in and still have margin? To just breathe.
Well, and so many times too, then you throw a hobby in there, or you're redoing your house. There's just always stuff. And I think too that goes back to are some of them things that you're doing together that you love doing together, and that is kind of rejuvenating for you or replenishing for you. And again, I think it goes back to a set of questions that just the two of you ask each other to reset, and then looking at the calendar. And, it may be as simple as, you know what, we're going to plan in a few weeks to get out of town for 2 nights. And so we'll just, it's going to be crazy until then. But we've got that to kind of a carrot hanging out there to look forward to. So again, there's so many things that really are, I think, dependent on personality, on the rhythm of your family, on just that constant conversation.
Then you'll have the opportunity to tell them. Because I feel like, for me, Hudson's he's always doing a million things. And I think I've found in the last couple of weeks that something that's really important to me is that we go to bed at the same time.
Yes.
And for the last couple of weeks, I'm tired at 9 p.m. and he stays up till midnight, and then he's up before I am and he's already working, and so I'm like, I didn't even see you I feel like I haven't seen you for 3 days. And it's weird that just that okay, at 10 o'clock, we're both going to bed. It makes a difference for me for some reason, you know?
I think it does. And, you know, and like we've been talking about, different seasons are different. And there are times, just like in organizational life, I think in family life, there are problems to solve and tensions to manage. And so sometimes when you know it's a hard week or whatever, we need to look at it and go, okay, this is a problem we need to solve. This is a conversation. This is a let's sit down with our calendars and figure out what we can get rid of so that we're not chronically having these same kind of weeks. Other times, like for instance, the baseball seasons that I have mentioned, you know, we chose that. We want the kids to be able to play. They want to play. And we just decide, okay, this is going to be a crazy 8 weeks. And it's going to be a tension we manage rather than a problem that we're trying to solve. And we may get creative to try to figure out how can we have some dinner times together in spite of a crazy baseball schedule. It may be Chick-fil-A on a blanket, you know, behind the bleachers. But it's going to be a tension that we manage. So I think sometimes in certain seasons, it is what it is. And it's what we've chosen, and we've looked at the calendar, and there really isn't anything this month that we want to remove or we feel like we can remove. So let's then move to the conversation of how do we manage the tension? How do we manage the tension so that we're not, you know, having conflict in the midst of the busyness? How do we manage the tension of having the time that we want with our kids and all of those things? So problems to solve, tensions to manage. It's an organizational principle, and it is a family principle.
Yeah,
That's so great. So, Sandra, this is a great conversation so far. Now, we're talking all about creating breathing room. What happens once we finally get there?
When we have breathing room.
When we finally create that margin and that
you know, there
breathing
are
room.
so many things. There's peace, which is huge. You know,
That sounds nice.
You know, I feel like the Holy Spirit has more ground to manifest those fruits of the Spirit in me personally. I'm a better person. I'm a better mom. I'm a better wife. I'm a better friend. I'm a better daughter. I'm a better human. You know, when I have breathing room, I know that about myself. But one of the things that I have seen, and again, standing where I stand and having, you know, some life in the rearview mirror, the benefits of having breathing room is you can look back at a certain season or a certain period of time with your kids or early marriage years or whatever it is and not have regrets. That's not have regrets for really having missed the good stuff. And that's huge to me because when we move out of, you know, of a season, we don't get a redo. We don't get to do it over. And when we have those regrets, you know, we take those to the Lord and we deal with it because we all have regrets. None of us are perfect parents. None of us are perfect spouses. You know, none of us are perfect in any of the roles in our life. But having breathing room, I think, really does propel us forward to the place where we can have fewer regrets and we have amazing memories of not missing the good stuff.
That's huge. Yeah.
That's the money shot right there, people. There. So, Sandra, some people are hearing the podcast and they're hearing from people that, you know, most of us are in ministry and we work for a nonprofit. And so talk to the people that are listening that say, hey, my job would never allow me to cut down on my hours. Like, is that a problem to be solved? Or talk to those who say that we don't get the real world. And that's what I've loved about you and Andy is you've never removed yourselves from the real world. You guys are so connected with the people that come to North Point week after week after week. You guys are always speaking straight to people that live in the real world. So I want to make sure that people hear that side. What would you say to people who say, gosh, I just don't know how I could pull that off logistically?
Right. That's tough. It really is tough. And I think what I would say for somebody who really is in a place where they can't establish breathing room, they really don't have any control over their schedule, they're struggling with that. I think one of the things would be to recognize that there really are going to be those seasons. We don't have control over everything. Recognize that there are those seasons. And I think that God many, many times meets us there and kind of gives us grace. He's so good in our parenting where we fall short to give us the grace. And I even think in the breathing room, when we are truly doing everything that we can to establish it, when we are laying things at His feet, when we are, you know, spending time with Him in the regular rhythm of our lives, I just think He kind of meets us with that grace and mercy and kind of fills in the gaps. And I think we can ask Him for that.
Yeah.
I think we can say, God, I'm in a season, I would much rather be home more. But if I choose to do that, it means a new job or a move or something that might not be the best thing for the whole family. And once you establish that that isn't the right thing to do, which it could be, that could be part of the solution, then you just trust him to fill in the gaps where you're lacking.
And it seems like for those people, that are in that situation, it seems like they just need to be so much more intentional about when they have the breathing room, how they use that time to make sure that the time they do have, the margin they do have.
Not just Netflix?
Not just Netflix.
Okay.
I mean, unless that works
and
for
that's
them.
so true. And if you think about your finances, it's the same way. How many times do we look at something and go, well, I can't afford that? Well, the truth is, there's some other things I could shave off of my spending that would allow us to be able to have date night or would allow us to get out of town for a night. And so, just being realistic about evaluating the calendar and like you said, just kind of shave off what you can, make the most of every moment that you do have some flexibility, and then trust God to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes I think we have to go so far as maybe to trust him to help us to find a new job.
Yeah.
So that's not a fun thing to say out loud, but the reality is, I've talked with several people in the middle of life in marriage, and I said, look, you have been struggling for 5 years with your job. I keep hearing the same story. Your kids are feeling neglected. Your wife's feeling neglected. You need to make a hard choice.
Yeah.
And I think that's an okay thing to say.
It really is an okay thing because so often, the being stuck really is, I'm stuck because I'm in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so, making some hard changes. And again, conversations with a boss. It really may be, you know what? I need to figure out my approach and go have a sit down with the boss and say, I really love this job and I would love to stay here, but it's not conducive to the kind of family environment that I'm trying to develop. And is there any wiggle room? Is there anything that we can do here?
Yeah, because if you aren't in control of your breathing room, that means someone else is. And so it means maybe it's going to that person.
And often this very thing is people who are self-employed, so they are the boss. But the reality is, to make that thing work in their mind, it's going to take X number of hours, which is way more than, is going to be beneficial for the family. And again, it may be time for a change, or it may be a time to evaluate the fears and go, okay, am I doing more than I really need to be doing because of a fear that's at the root of it?
Yeah, that's great. Well, Sandra, we always like to end our conversations with one simple thing, because we've talked about a lot already so far today. And so what is one simple thing that everyone can do to create more breathing room in their lives and in their marriages?
Yeah. I think what I would say to this question is recognize and renew your mind to the fact that a no for now is not necessarily a no for always. I would have loved to have done seminary earlier. At 51, I'm learning how to cite references and, do all kinds of stuff that is so different from when I was in college. But that was not the season. This one is. It was a no back then, but it's a yes. It's a big old yes now. So recognize that a no for now isn't necessarily a no for always.
That's awesome. Sandra, I'm going to tack on my own one simple thing, which is actually your one simple thing, because I was watching your videos and was like, that's awesome too.
Because you're an overachiever and you were doing homework before our interview about breathing room.
Well, Terry does have the breathing room study, so we got that at Christmas.
Gotcha.
So we're all set there. But so would you suggest this? So in one of your videos, you talked about you and Andy had this conversation, and you even kind of referenced it a little bit a few minutes ago, but you asked, if you could adjust my schedule any way you wanted, what would it look like? Is that a good question for spouses to ask of each other?
You know what? That would be a great jumping off spot for a constant conversation to say, okay, if, in the perfect world, what would it look like? That's a great place to start the conversation. And then you move on from there, because many times it isn't realistic.
Yeah.
It really isn't. But it's a great place to start the conversation.
So I thought I'd ask to see if we were setting couples up for a fight, or if that was going to be a helpful starting point.
Timing.
Right.
All that.
So, but going back to what Sandra said, just to reiterate, the one simple thing this week, recognize that a no for now is not a no for always. And then if you're so bold, you could ask your spouse, if you could adjust my schedule any way you wanted, what would it look like? So,
and the key there is that the question isn't, if I could adjust your schedule any way I wanted, here's what I'd do. You have to ask it of yourself.
Yes.
I love that.
That's great. Well, Sandra, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. This has been hugely helpful. It really, really has. And if people want to connect with you on social media, where's the best place to follow you?
I guess I'm kind of everywhere: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
So just search Sandra Stanley, and we'll find you on Instagram, Facebook, all those good things. And if you want to connect and find out more about Breathing Room, I know that people can check out breathingroom.org. And like we said at the beginning of the episode, it's not just a book or devotional. It's an app. It's videos. It's a study. It's awesome stuff.
Sandra, I just have to say that it's been so neat watching this next phase for you, watching, Comparison Trap and then Breathing Room. And I thought when I saw that, she was so faithful to do what she felt like God was calling her to do. I know that you really spoke into, and still do, I'm sure, the pastor's wives at North Point, and he said, I'm doing a good work and I cannot come down. I mean, that mattered so much to Nancy Lowe when she was home with the littles. When I think about you and Andy, I really do think of one of the things that seems to have made you guys so successful is this idea of Breathing Room. I don't see a lot of high-octane leaders doing this, and I think that's what leads to, I can't do this anymore, I'm all done, I'm burned out. But just to say, wow, like you said, it's made me a better mom, it's made me a better wife, it's made me a better human. And watching you guys do that as a family, and like you said, look back without regret, I think that's exactly what we're talking. And I think it's so counterintuitive to what the world is teaching, that we got to go, press. And it changes everything when we can breathe. That's where life is.
That is where life is. That's where the joy in marriage is, and the joy in parenting is, and just the joy in relationships in general.
Thank you so much I'm so glad that this is what you decided now that you've got Breathing Room, was to talk about Breathing Room. So thank you so much for this. And I think this is a great study for men and women. It's a pretty study and a pretty book, but men, if they're okay with having it in their pickup truck,
it would be their brown bag book.
The brown bag.
Brown bagger.
That's amazing.
I love it.
Well, thank you guys for having this conversation, and thank you for joining us for the Married People podcast. We hope that today's episode helped you realize that marriage is a little easier than you think. And before we wrap up, we want to hear from you. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and connect with us at marriedpeople.org/podcast.
Yeah, and maybe a great thing that they could tell us for this episode is, what are some things that they fill in their breathing room time with? What are some creative ways that when they have margin, what do they do with that margin? And how is that rejuvenating for them and launches them into their week?
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So leave us your thoughts again on Facebook, Instagram, and at our website, marriedpeople.org/podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through your Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a review. Your review will help us make this podcast better and get these conversations in front of more married couples who need to hear them. And finally, if you want to follow Sandra on social media, and if you want to check out her book, Breathing Room, visit our website, marriedpeople.org. We'll have links to all of that stuff there. Until next time, I'm CJ.
I'm Afton.
I'm Ted.
I'm Sandra.
And thank you for listening.